So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today and attending our webinar on the guidelines for the mandatory face covering bylaw hosted by the City of Mississauga. My name is Walter Garrison, and I work with our City of Mississauga's Economic Development Office. I would like to introduce our panel today. In today's webinar, we will be having opening remarks from our Mayor, Bonnie Crombie. Sam Rogers, Director of Enforcement for the City of Mississauga, will then provide guidance to businesses on the city's bylaw requirement of wearing face coverings in enclosed public spaces. Louise Aubin, Director of Health Protection, Region of Peel Public Health, will provide general guidance on appropriate mask usage. Amanpreet Bains from our office has joined us to provide technical support. Before we start, I would like to provide some housekeeping information. If you would like to submit a question as part of our Q&A, please use the chat function, which is located on the right-hand side of your WebEx application. I would ask that you select all panelists to ensure that your question does not get missed. Today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be shared with you at a future date. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded again. Thank you. So I would now like to introduce our Mayor, Bonnie Crombie, who will be making opening remarks. Mayor Crombie.
Thank you, Walter, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see we have so many people from the business community joining us for today's webinar on our mandatory mask covering or face covering bylaw. It's very important and a timely one, and I want to thank our EDO for hosting and for our Director of Enforcement, Sam Rogers, and Louise Aubin, our Director of Health Protection from Public Health, for leading today's session. There's no denying that COVID has had a significant impact on our business community. Many of you have had to change the way you do business and have had to do so very quickly. Whether you've established e-commerce or making changes to your storefronts or in the interiors of your stores to ensure the health and safety of both your staff and your customers. So I want to commend the entire business community for your strength, particularly your resilience during these very challenging times. I know it hasn't been easy. We're doing what we can at the city to make it easier for you. So we've implemented several forms of tax relief, and we're working on an economic recovery plan that will identify both the short-term and the long-term ways that we can help you rebound and thrive after this crisis. We've also launched a plan called Mississauga Made. It is a campaign to help promote and encourage people to support local businesses, our friends, our families, and our neighbors. We understand that there are many new rules and regulations you'll have to follow, and our goal is to make your lives, or not make your lives unnecessarily complex or difficult. And that's why our EDO team and economic development team is here to help you. We have a responsibility to ensure the health and safety of your employees and your customers, which is why Council passed a bylaw to make face coverings mandatory in indoor public spaces. As our economy reopens and people start to gather again, we inevitably open ourselves up to increased risk of transmission. We're doing this out of abundance of caution and to help prevent a large second wave in the fall. Mandatory masks will help more businesses open and stay open, which is a good thing, and will help businesses recover after what has been an incredibly difficult year. I want to thank the business community and particularly the leaders in this regard. Many of you have already successfully implemented internal corporate policies requiring customers and your staff to wear face coverings, largely masks, and as a result, your customers feel safer and welcomed, and businesses starting to rebound. So I want to be clear that the goal of our new bylaw is to put the onus on residents and businesses, but we don't want to unfairly burden businesses and make you solely responsible for the compliance. Note that this is also a temporary bylaw, and we're committed to revisiting it in the fall, depending on their COVID numbers and the situation of the pandemic in Peel. So I won't get into the nuts and bolts. I'll leave that to Sam and Louise, but I do want to thank you very much for joining us this morning and for doing your part to help reduce the spread of the virus in our community. So thanks to you, we've been able to flank that curve to stop the spread of the virus and keep Mississauga health and safe. the City of Mississauga continues to be our focus, and we're here to help our local businesses and entrepreneurs. We remain a vibrant and resilient city and a top destination for business and for talent. And I'm confident that we're going to get through this crisis together and come out stronger together. So stay healthy, stay safe, stay strong, and enjoy the rest of the webinar. Thank you. Thanks for having me this morning. Back to you, Walter.
Thank you very much, Mayor Crombie. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Sam Rogers. Sam Rogers is the Director of Enforcement at the City of Mississauga since 2017 and was previously the Manager of Security Services. Sam is responsible for managing all business functions of the Enforcement Division, including overseeing services and operations for animal services, compliance and licensing, mobile licensing and parking enforcement. Prior to joining the city, Sam was a Senior Manager, Global Protective Services at Scotiabank. He is a retired Major in the Canadian Armed Forces and was deployed to Afghanistan in 2009. Sam holds a Bachelor of Business Administration degree with a major in International Business from Bishop's University. I'll now transfer the presenting duties over to Sam. Sam.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Walter. Thank you, Mayor Crombie, for your opening remarks. I am here this morning. I'm just going to get my screen up. Great. So the purpose of my presentation this morning is to provide all of you with an overview of the mandatory face covering bylaw and our approach to education and supporting business in your implementation of the bylaw requirements. So the mandatory face covering bylaw is in accordance with Dr. Lowe's recommendations that a temporary bylaw be enacted at the local level to require face coverings in all indoor enclosed public spaces. The bylaw is intended to align with the Peel Health Core 4 behaviors that includes physical distancing, hand washing, getting tested, and more consistent use of non-medical masks and face coverings. So by way of background, we're currently enforcing 3 related provincial emergency orders and 3 related bylaws. And the biggest challenge we continue to face is communicating the changing rules to the public and you business operators. Generally speaking, we don't want residents and businesses to worry that you're going to be ticketed or fined every time you leave your home or open your doors. But we also don't want people blatantly disregarding the rules and putting other people at risk. Compliance with this bylaw will really depend on the public's good faith and willingness to do the right thing. So this is a summary of the bylaw definition of face covering. And as you can see, in addition to non-medical masks, a face covering can also include bandanas, scarves, or anything else that covers the mouth and nose and chin without gaping. The bylaw requires that both the person, the individual, and the operator, the business, be subject to the bylaw. We believe that if both groups are included in the bylaw and everyone takes on a role of responsibility, then there will be a greater likelihood for positive impact. One unique feature of our bylaw is to include Mississauga transit vehicles and vehicles for hire, which includes taxis and transportation network companies, which are Uber and Lyft primarily. Now there's 4 primary requirements for operators, and we're going to get into the details of this today for you. The first is that business operators shall not permit a person to enter or to remain in a public establishment or vehicle without a face covering. The second is to develop a face covering policy to ensure bylaw compliance. The third is to provide a copy of the policy for inspection by an officer, a municipal law enforcement officer, upon request. And the fourth is to post signage at all entrances that persons are required to wear face covering in accordance with this bylaw. I'll speak later in the presentation about how we plan to support businesses to implement the bylaw requirements. So this is a summary of the list of indoor public establishments, which aligns with other jurisdictions, and it's essentially any portion of a building that the public is ordinarily permitted to access. So this includes retail stores, restaurants, places of worship, personal care services, concert venues, open houses, and municipal buildings. There's a full comprehensive list of what all indoor public establishments are listed in the bylaw itself. And this is the list of indoor public establishments which are recommended to be exempt, correction. Again, this list aligns with other jurisdictions and is based on Dr. Lowe's recommendations. It's important to note that most of these locations have already established policies for face coverings and other COVID-19 mitigation measures. With respect to people and activities, there are a number of exemptions. And the most challenging exemption to manage will be for individuals who are unable to wear a face covering for medical reasons or for reason of disability. There is no requirement for people to prove their exemption. And this is one of our key messages, in particular to business operators. I'll speak more about that in detail later in the presentation. So we plan to take a graduated approach to enforcement with a heavy focus on public education. Formal notices may be issued if there are gross, intentional, or repetitive violations observed. And this is a graphic sample of what our social media education campaign has been so far. We understand that there hasn't been a long period to implement from the date the bylaw went into force and effect, and we want to work with businesses to make sure that you understand the requirements and implement them effectively. So we know this will pose a challenge to some business operators, and we've developed a business support toolkit to help businesses implement the bylaw requirements. This includes a policy development guideline, downloadable signage, business-specific FAQs, and webinars like the one we're doing today. So a face covering policy can be a relatively simple document, and it is one of the key requirements of the bylaw for you, the business operator. It's intended to be the means by which we ensure that all businesses and that all business staff are aware of the bylaw and their role and responsibility. So the policy will need to contain key bylaw information and requirements such as what a face covering actually is, the bylaw exemptions, what to do when someone enters the premise and is not wearing a face mask, and the business signage requirements. As I mentioned previously, there is no requirement for people to prove their exemption, and this is a key message that needs to go to you and your staff. You're required to ask a person not wearing a mask if they are exempt, not what the exemption is. If you ask that question, then you have complied with the bylaw, and any further escalation should be referred over to law enforcement like my team or police. So we've provided downloadable signage on the resources I'll share with the links at the end. And businesses are free to use the downloadable signage or to develop your own in accordance with your branding. As long as the signage has got the basic requirements of the bylaw listed in it, that all individuals are required to wear a face mask, face covering rather, and a reference to the bylaw and a list of the exemptions, then the signage is in accordance with the bylaw requirements. So the city has two primary websites for COVID-19 support, and I know that Louise will be providing further resources during her presentation. These are just some screenshots of the two, the Unlimited, which is specific to businesses, and then the city website over to the left, and the links are there below. I'd like to thank you for your time this morning. And I just wanted to remind everybody, we're all in this together. And I thank you for doing your part to help stop the spread of COVID-19. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Walter. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam, for your presentation. I would now like to introduce Louise Aubin. Louise is the Director of Health Protection with Peel Public Health. Her current responsibilities include food and water safety programs, the prevention and management of vector-borne diseases, tobacco control, vaccine prevention programs, and air quality modeling, climate change adaptation, and other local environmental health issues. Within Peel Public Health's COVID-19 response, Louise provides direction and support to the operations section, specifically on issues related to enforcement, safe reopening of business and child care centers, and requests for service. She holds a master's degree in environmental studies from York University and a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology degree from the University of Toronto. I'll now hand it over to Louise for your presentation.
Thank you, Walter. I'm just going to share my screen right now. And unfortunately, the wrong screen is coming up. There we go. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. And I want to echo Mayor Crombie's comments and especially thank all of you for your participation in this bylaw. So the overall goal for public health is to break the chain of transmission of COVID. It's unlikely that we will eliminate it completely, and we expect to see pop-up outbreaks. However, as our economy begins to reopen and people are out and about in the community, it becomes more and more difficult to physically distance. Masks can help protect against exposure to viruses. Masks alone, however, will not prevent the spread of COVID. It's important to look at the 4 core messages that Sam had mentioned in his presentation. The need to stay apart, to physically distance, to wash hands often with soap and water or using hand sanitizer, to mask up, wearing a non-medical mask, and maintain physical distance where necessary. We have medical grade masks for healthcare workers, and I'll speak to that in a moment. And to get tested. If you think you might have COVID-19 or have been exposed to it, you should get tested. While waiting for the test results, stay at home, self-isolate, and prevent the potential spread. I'm sorry, are the slides showing up on the screen?
Yes, Louise, the slides are showing up.
Okay, sorry, for my end, I'm having trouble seeing them. So with respect to the types of masks, there are a variety of different masks available. The N95 Respirator Masks are masks that are intended for health professionals or first responders. These masks are require a very specialized fitting, and they're very protective for wearers and for others, and these are not the masks that we're recommending that people use. For the purposes of the bylaw, the masks that we're recommending are the procedural are also called surgical masks. These are also used by medical professionals and first responders. They're protective of wearers and others, and they are disposable. The other type of mask that can be used are cloth masks for everyday use. They're reusable, they're washable. Now, in order to be effective, the mask has to be worn properly, and I'll speak to the mask wearing in the next slides. It's important to reiterate or to stress that the mask has to cover both the nose and mouth to be effective. When people are being tested for COVID, it's a nasal swab that goes up. There's a reason why that's the case. And so if the mask is worn below the nose, it really isn't being as effective as it needs to be. So in order to put on a mask properly, it's important to clean your hands beforehand. When you're picking up the mask, to put it on your face, to hold it by the side loops, and to put the loops over your ears, making sure that gaps and so on along the side of your face are closed off. Don't touch the front of the mask when you're putting it on or when you're taking it off. Really, you should not be touching your face at all when you're wearing the mask. When you remove the mask, it's the same procedure, but in reverse. So you take the mask by the loops and pull it off. Make sure that you dispose of the mask properly. And I know when COVID, many complaints about masks being found in parking lots and all over the ground and so on. It might be helpful to have receptacles in your business that if people are exiting, they can take off the mask if it's disposable and throw it off. Once the mask is off, you should wash your hands again after removing it. So with respect to resources, here's the list of resources that we've made available. And with that, that concludes my little section. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for your participation in this bylaw. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Louise, for your presentation. I would now like to address some of the questions that have been asked by our attendees in the webinar. And the first question is, what are the rules for private offices? So I'm assuming the question is, so once somebody is inside a private office. So either Sam or Louise, if you could speak to that, please.
Yep, that's me. Couldn't find the unmute button as usual. So private offices, yes. Private offices are not subject to the bylaw. And there are, you know, some nuances to this that, you know, we've had to figure out just within our, you know, own corporation within the City of Mississauga. So think of indoor public establishments as any public areas. So, you know, if you're a worker who's working in a, you know, an operations zone, so a kind of a cubicle area where the public doesn't have access to, but you have to walk through a public area of the building to get there, you are required to wear a face covering through that public space, including the elevator, up to your, you know, office area. And, you know, typically an office area will have some type of access control. So once you card in and you go into the cubicle area where the public can't gain access, that's when you're no longer required to wear your face covering. So private offices, the operations area where the public can't gain access, there are not rules under this bylaw for wearing a face covering, but the public access points and areas, you are required to wear one.
Okay, thank you, Sam. And I think that dovetails into our second question. It asks, will our landlord be required to implement this bylaw mandating face coverings in the common spaces of our office building, lobbies, hallways, elevators, and restrooms? And I think you've answered that question.
Yeah, I have. I'd just like to elaborate on that because that's an excellent question as well. We understand that, you know, there's in a shopping mall, for instance, you know, there's the building operator who is responsible for the main mall entrances, but then there's also the business establishments themselves that are responsible for the business specific entrances. So the roles from an operator perspective are twofold there. And you know, if you're the business operator, yeah, you need to have the signage on your specific storefront and control your access and ensure that people aren't permitted in without the face covering. But conversely, the mall, you know, in this case, owner and operators responsible for the mall entrance signage. So in that case, it's a twofold operator responsibility.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Our next question comes from a company and they ask, we are a freight forwarder and private organization with limited public access, with 60 employees working in the building in open cubicles and a warehouse. Does this law apply to us?
So the short answer is no. In this case, if there's no public access, well, this says limited. So for the areas that the public can access and do readily and normally, then you're required to wear the face mask there. But generally speaking, from that, description of a warehouse where, public are not accessing warehouse for obvious health and safety reasons, not required to wear a face covering under the bylaw. And again, I think we'll get into this in a little bit more detail later, but that's not to say businesses don't have their own policies and requirements as well. But for the purposes of the bylaw, no, not required.
So Sam, let me provide a scenario. So if I'm a business, I'm a facility, and I have a delivery service with an external driver coming in to deliver a package, and so I have a shipper receiver in my location, what would be the procedure there?
Perfect example. So in that case, you are in that receiving area, face covering required. It's either that and or a protective shield can be established, and that's something we're doing at the city with our customer service counters. So you've got a big public hall access area and then a number of service counters. If a protective shield is established, so like plexiglass, then that effectively creates a barrier and sort of that operational zone I was speaking about earlier. And if there is a protective shield and a barrier that delineates now the public space from the operational space, a face covering wouldn't be required on the staff side, but the deliverer would still be required to wear a face covering because they're coming in and are still in the public area.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Louise, I think this next question might be for you. Well, businesses will be creating signs at the front of the entrance informing them that they must, or affording clients, I should say, that they must wear a mask before entering the building. Is there any specific messaging or language that we need to follow?
It was mentioned earlier by Sam that businesses can create their own signs under this bylaw as long as they have the core messages. The core message, of course, being that there is a requirement to wear a mask in the public areas of that thing. With respect to other messaging, we have been really trying to get the message, the core four that I spoke about in my presentation, out about physical distancing, about hand sanitation, being tested if you need to be tested, and wearing a mask. So the absolute requirement is the message around the mask, but we would appreciate the opportunity to get that message out as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And I have seen, like in some local businesses, they are putting up signage. I saw that even on Saturday, I saw that. The next question is it deals with seniors. Is it mandatory for seniors to use masks, as some have a medical condition which they cannot use the mask? So do they need to get a doctor's note from their family doctor and always keep the note on them in case they are stopped by authorities in public? What are the exceptions or protocols for people who can't wear masks due to these special medical conditions?
So yeah, I'll take this one. And I did stress this a lot in the presentation, but I think it's definitely worth going over again, because this is one of our key messages. Regardless of the exemption, if you've got a doctor's note or medical proof of it, or you don't have any proof, it doesn't matter. You are not required to provide any proof of any type of exemption to anybody in accordance with this bylaw. So the message for businesses is, if somebody's coming into your establishment and they are not wearing a face covering, you're to advise them of the rules, and that's what your signage is for, to point to the signage and say, are you aware there's a bylaw now requiring a face covering? If they aren't aware of it, well, now you've educated them, and that's successful. They may not have a face covering with them, but at least they'll know for the future. If they are aware of it, then the next question you can ask is, do you have a reason for not wearing one, or are you exempt? Anything along that line is okay to ask. That's the if. So do you have one? You're allowed to ask if they have an exemption. If they say yes, I am exempt from this, that is the end of the conversation as from the bylaw perspective. You are not required to confirm that, to get proof of that, to validate that exemption. If they say they are exempt, then they are exempt as far as the bylaw is considered. And so we don't want people pursuing that any further, because that's where, you know, escalations can ensue. People are, you know, we want to be very kind and respectful and understand that there are a multitude of disabilities out there preventing people from wearing face coverings. Not everybody's the same, and many of these disabilities are invisible. So we really want to stress and emphasize to operators to be kind and to be sensitive about all of the exemptions that are out there. You are required to ask if somebody's exempt, but you are not required to confirm what that exemption is. And I hope I've made that clear enough, Walter. Please let me know if I can stress that
No,
anymore.
I think there's some of the questions I think I'm going to ask because it bears repeating what we just said, Sam.
That's great.
The one thing you talked about too is, and you said this previously, is that companies do have their own policy. Now, does that medical exemption, does that override the company policy? I know you answered the question, but I think it bears repeating.
Well, this is another nuance and challenging piece to this bylaw, and we recognize this. The bylaw, you know, requires that people not be permitted access if they're not wearing a face covering, but if they're exempt, they are. That's not to say that businesses can't institute their own policies that preclude, you know, anybody regardless for wearing a face covering into their own, because it's a private establishment. So owners, occupiers of public of establishments do have the right to set their terms of service in their own premises and to deny entry to establishments. But, and this is the big but, you must comply with the Ontario Human Rights Code, and in some cases the Charter. So if you're not sure about any of that, we do recommend, you know, you seek legal advice if you're going to set the bar higher than what the bylaw has. And that would be denying somebody even though they're claiming an exemption. The City of Mississauga's bylaw includes an exemption for persons that can't wear masks for reason of disability, as I mentioned. And we are in accordance with the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Charter for that reason. So that is a nuanced piece of this. And, you know, we're not going to advise one way or another. It's, you know, businesses are private establishments and they've got their rights to set rules above and beyond any city bylaw.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. This is a very interesting question here. Does the mandatory, because this is when you cross one jurisdiction to another, does the mandatory masking apply to any taxi, Uber, limo at Pearson Airport, which is on federal lands? So I'm assuming the person is picked up at Pearson and then they're driven into the city to their residence from flight, or going to Pearson from the residence.
That is a great and very complicated question. I hate being the nuanced, complicated guy this morning, but it is what it is. So the short answer is no. When airport taxis and limos are on airport ground, they are not subject to City of Mississauga bylaws. They've got their own rules governed under the Greater Toronto Area Airport Authority. I can tell you that they've got their own requirements, mandatory shields, mandatory face coverings. So their requirements are actually at a higher level, one might say, than even our bylaw, but they are not subject to the City of Mississauga bylaw. Once they leave the GTAA property, though, they are subject to it. Where it gets a little bit kind of overlapped is, you know, my team in the City of Mississauga is responsible for licensing those vehicles. So we do have some sort of jurisdictional authority over them from a licensing perspective. But I don't really think any of that matters, because really the GTAA and the City of Mississauga's requirements are quite aligned. So they're subject to face coverings in both areas.
Okay, thank you for that. I have a question as well about the fines, and I guess, Sam, this would be for you. Could you clarify the fines under the bylaw? If someone is to get charged, and I think you talk about repeat offenses under the bylaw, what would the amount likely be?
That's a great question, and I didn't include that in my presentation this morning because some of that fine information still needs to be confirmed. I can tell you, at a high level, if a Part 3 summons charge were to be laid, right now the fines are in the range a minimum of $500 and a maximum of $100,000. But what we are in the process of applying for through the Ministry of the Attorney General are what's called set fines, and that's typically what you would see being issued, and that's what people mostly refer to as a ticket. So the set fines for tickets have not been established yet. The bylaw just went into force and effect on Friday, July 10th. What we're expecting the set fines to come back at are $1,000 for businesses. And the reason we expect that to come back is that's what the City of Toronto set fine is. But we're also applying for a set fine for individuals, and our bylaw is different from the City of Toronto's in that individuals or persons are also subject to the bylaw. So the onus is not strictly on businesses to comply with this. So set fines, $1,000 in all likelihood for business, and Part 3 anywhere from $500 to $100,000.
Okay, thank you for that. I have a question. Are there any other reasons aside from medical or disability that are acceptable as exemptions?
Yes, absolutely. So in the bylaw, and I'll bring it up here, there are a total of 9 exemptions in total. We've focused on the third one listed in the bylaw, which is persons with disability or medical reasons. But I'll read off the other exemptions as well.
Would you want to share your screen again, Sam? Amon, I think that might be good actually. If you could put that slide up, that would be good. If you don't mind, you can make Sam the presenter.
Yeah, I'll just bring up a Word document here. That's the bylaw. Okay, Walter, can you see that? Okay.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So this is section 11 of the bylaw, part 5, section 11, exemptions, and it goes down to number 9 there. But as you can see, children 2 years of age or younger, children between the ages of 3 and 5 are refused to wear. That can't be persuaded by their caregiver. Number 3 is the big one that we've talked a lot about today. Persons inside a restaurant or bar while consuming food or drink, provided such businesses are permitted to operate under the emergency orders. Persons who are engaged in athletic, fitness, or aquatic activity. Employees and agents of the operator of a municipality within an area not for public access or within or behind a physical barrier. This is really referring to a bus operator more than anything. So bus operators have got a protective shield, and so that's sort of that delineation between public access and that operational area. Persons while receiving services involving the face and requiring the removal of face covering, provided such services are permitted to operate in accordance with emergency orders. Police, fire, or paramedics, and persons while testifying, examining, or making submissions at a court tribunal. So that is the full list of individual exemptions.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Sam. And I think, Amon, if you want to make me presenter again, I'll do, one of the things that we can do with respect to a lot of this information is there is a business toolkit which we can share. And Sam, you talked about it, and I'll just show on our website that on our futuresunlimited.ca COVID-19 website, we've got a toolkit for businesses, which talks about the bylaw, the policy guidelines, the exemptions, the enforcement of mandatory face coverings, and then resources. And I believe as well, Louise, we've got the region of Peel as well to share. And I guess, Louise, a good question, because when the pandemic really hit in North America, it became extremely difficult to get face coverings just in the first place. Now it seems less so. I'm interested what you're seeing with respect to, the region of Peel and just your interactions as far as the availability of face coverings, whether they be as you talked about, surgical masks or cloth face coverings.
Certainly. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. I have to apologize. A few minutes ago, I have a cat who chose to start crying at the minute Sam was speaking, so I apologize if it got picked up on video. Murphy's Law that would happen in the background. With respect to masks, they are much more widely available. The N95 masks that I recommended are more challenging, but they are, I'm going to repeat, they are not the masks that we are recommending that people use. With respect to the disposable masks or the cloth covered masks, they are now widely available in businesses across Peel. I was out over the course of the weekend, and everything from convenience stores to clothing stores are now selling masks. So they are widely available. However, if somebody can't acquire a mask or can't purchase a mask for whatever reason, scarves do meet the requirements of the bylaw. So that's another alternative for people.
Great. Thank you very much, Louise. And also on our Economic Development Office website, we have a number of suppliers as well listed, like in general, there's suppliers that you can link to. So for businesses that are looking, we do have resources as well, which I think is very important. I think we've covered pretty well everything. Louise, I don't see any more questions. So do you have any final comments that you would like to give with respect to this?
Thank you, Walter, for that opportunity. I do want to draw people's attention to the Region of Peel website as well. There are a number of resources available for people to use, and they can be found, they're in the chat box, but at peelregion.ca/coronavirus/resources, and also at coronavirus/business. So lots of posters, lots of different resources that are available that people are welcome to pick up and use and disseminate as they see fit. Lastly, Walter, I'd like to thank all of you and the business community for the opportunity to present, and also for your cooperation in this. It's an important step forward, and we're moving towards reopening more and more businesses and getting back to as close to normal as we can in this COVID world. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Louise. Much appreciated. Region Peel Public Health has been an excellent partner as we disseminate information to our businesses and the greater community in the city. Sam, do you have any final comments that you would like to make?
Yeah, thanks very much, Walter. Would really like to echo Louise's comments. Want to thank the business community for your support and cooperation. The speed and the pace at which change is happening is unbelievable. And from an enforcement perspective, we understand that the bylaw went into force and effect on Friday, and we're having a webinar on Monday telling you what you need to do. We're already receiving complaints. We fully expected that. There's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion out there as to what the individual roles and responsibilities are. We're going to take our time. We want to work with you to make sure everybody's clear on that. We want to crawl, walk, run this, but more than anything, we want people to have the right intentions, and really want to stress the being kind and being respectful to people as we work through this change and implement requirements. If you've got questions, we've obviously put up all the resources. You can call 311 as well. We're always happy to send out an inspection officer to help educate and clarify requirements as we move along. And we're going to be patient as we work through implementation of this, understanding, the greater good that we're trying to achieve collectively. So want to thank everybody again for your time today. Thanks.
Great. Well, I hope that everyone who attended today found this informative. Again, I want to thank Louise Aubin, Director of Health Protection Region of Peel Public Health, for your remarks. Louise, thank you again. I would also like to thank Sam Rogers, Director of Enforcement for the City of Mississauga. Thank you, Sam, for the information that you provided, and for both of you for answering these questions that our attendees had. And I want to also thank Mayor Bonnie Crombie for her opening remarks and continuing to champion our business community in the City of Mississauga. And as we said, we will be providing a recording of this webinar at a future date. Finally, I would like to thank Amanpreet Bains, who is our technical support. So Aman, thank you very much for the work today. And stay safe and healthy, everyone. And please go to our website to see any other information that we have on the bylaw and future webinars. Thank you.